Swallowtail Lighthouse on Manan Island was built in 1859, and today it is one of the most visited and photographed lighthouses in Atlantic Canada. Currently, major fundraising efforts are underway to restore the iconic landmark for future generations. I'm Vicki Hogarth, and welcome to Southwest Magazine. Today we will be sitting down with some of the key people behind the restoration process of Swallowtail Lighthouse. Anyone who's taken the hour-and-a-half ferry ride from mainland New Brunswick knows that Swallowtail is the first sign you've arrived to Manan, and it's the last memory you take with you when you leave. Swallowtail is woven into the fabric of the experience of the island, whether you're a first-time visitor or native islander, like Swallowtail Lightkeeper Ken Ingersoll.
But we're averaging 14,000 to 15,000 people here a summer. And that's without advertising. We don't advertise anything. It's just the draw of the tower. And you must admit, when you sail by here, you know, it's the first thing you see before you see much of Manan, and it's the last thing you see when you leave. So she's there to welcome you, and she's there to say goodbye. So it's, yeah. It was all emotion. I like to say it's all emotion that built this lighthouse. This lighthouse was built in 1859. In 1856, there was the Lord Ashburton disaster. And it was a very large bark, I believe it was anchored in St. John, New Brunswick, and a big northeast gale. And it drove it. It parted both anchors and its anchorage, and it drove it down the bay. And then it lost its sails, and it wound up being demasted. And they were completely at the mercy of the ocean. And they come down, and the next cove over is Whale Cove, is where they come ashore. It's called Ashburton Head. And there were 21 sailors, and they all died but 2. So that's the reason Swallowtail was built in 1859. Wow. Although even if the lighthouse had have been there, there was nothing they could have done, because they couldn't steer the ship, they just come ashore. But it did spark the demand for it. And back then we were a Commonwealth of England, so even to build that lighthouse, you had to get permission from the King of England to cut his trees, because it's built out of pine from Manan. Wow. Yeah.
As we're doing this interview, we're seeing many people walk behind you to visit the lighthouse. When people come here, what are things, if you're able to talk to them, that you tell them to do or make sure they see?
I'd love to talk to them about how the lighthouse has stood here. It's still, when I think about it, it's been since 1859. You know, the light was first lit on June 7th, 1860. And other than power outages, it hasn't been out. It's been going since. And, you know, and I just love to tell, there's so much history involved in the lighthouse. Nowadays, I just direct them to go in the tower, because it's a museum inside the tower. And Laurie has said everything is written on plaques in there, the whole history. So you can actually go to the top. You can read your way up or read your way down or whatever you like. You can spend 2 hours in there and learn all the history of the lighthouse. You know, it's like the little bell house that's attached to it. You know, that used to be out on the point, and there you see the old concrete foundation. There's lore about there used to be a lighthouse out there, and it was swept away with the Lightkeepers, and I've heard that story so many times.
Ken Ingersoll is one in a long line of Swallowtail's Lightkeepers. In 1936, Elodie Foster famously lost her life while she was tending the light. Her nightgown caught fire. She died from her injuries a day later. Glenn Foster is Elodie's great-nephew.
I had a great aunt that died in the lighthouse. She was lighting the light, you know, when it was a kerosene lantern. So, I mean, for me personally, the Swallowtail has a personal attachment. But I think that any islander, Swallowtail especially, where the ferry goes around it every day, you know, all day long, and it's the first thing you see when you leave Manan, it's the first thing you see when you come back. I think Swallowtail is probably the most important lighthouse. That's an awful thing to say, but anyways, that's how I feel.
What do you think it is about lighthouses that attract so many visitors? Manan's obviously a special place. A lot of people come to experience all aspects of it, but that's one.
Well, I mean, the lighthouse is, I mean, every time I go to Southern Headlight, Southwest Head, right, in the summer, you can hardly get around there. There's so many vehicles down there, and Swallowtail is you know, people are just attracted to, and now the Whistle out to Long Eddy, you know, I mean, they built a deck out there, and Laurie's deck in memory of my friend's wife, and I mean, the tourists just like lighthouses. People come to islands to see lighthouses, a lot of times just to see lighthouses, you know, so they're an integral part of tourism and the fabric of the island, right?
When you're on the boat, working as a fisherman, what is the experience of a lighthouse? I know it might not have a use in the same sense as it used to, but
well, it could.
Okay.
You know, I mean, it's been quite a while ago now, but I had an episode where I lost the power in my boat, in the engine room, right? And my old boat used to leak, and it was a wooden boat, and so I had to start shutting things off, you know, radars and equipment that kind of tells you where you are. But it was a clear night. We used to use paper charts, and I was coming from up at the bay, so I was headed west, and I could see 2 lighthouses, you know, Duck Island and Swallowtail. And our charts would tell us which one had, you know, the certain flash every second, how many seconds, and sure enough, you followed your compass. I was headed west, and I was headed for that lighthouse because I knew by how many flashes which one was which. So I didn't have any electronics to tell me where I were, but that lighthouse told me where I was, right? So there's one example, right? It rarely happens, but it does. And if you're in a little boat, like a dory or a skiff, and you're fishing off the beach, and it's really thick fog, right? Well, you can navigate with your cell phone, but what if your battery goes dead, right? Well, you can hear that, you can hear the foghorn, right? And you can point your boat towards your little skiff to the foghorn, right? Or if it gets dark on you before you get in, you can see the lighthouse. So there is a practical purpose for lighthouses in the event that something goes wrong, right? So it's still there. It's not used a lot, but it's still there. Lighthouses are owned by the federal government, right? I mean, and federal funds are scarce, or getting, you know. So they've decommissioned a lot of lighthouses and stuff, and community groups have gone to work to help restore these lighthouses, and in concert with the federal government sometimes, but most of the money's being raised by the communities, right? And I think if we don't do these things ourselves, no one's going to do it for us, right? So it's important that we restore these lighthouses. There's a lot of our landmarks that we've already lost. A lot of the old smoke sheds around the shores, I mean, they're privately owned. People can't afford to maintain an old smokestack if it's not being used commercially, right? So they end up, they're falling in the ocean. There's no one at fault, I mean, but it's privately owned things, but these are publicly owned. The lighthouses are owned by the people of Canada. And I think all the tourists that came here, if you asked them, after a lighthouse tour of Swallowtail, if they thought it was worth putting money into these lighthouses, they'd agree that it is, right? So that's my feeling on it.
Preserving lighthouses isn't a fate that all historic beacons are granted, especially ones that are remote and hard to reach. MJ Edwards, the executive director of the Grand Manan Museum, says Gannet Rock Lighthouse off Grand Manan hasn't been as lucky as Swallowtail.
Behind me is the second order Fresnel lens from the Gannet Rock Lighthouse. Gannet Rock was established in 1831, and this light was in that lighthouse from 1905 until 1967. So it's extremely vulnerable to the weather and storms, and it would be very hard to land tourists there, and the liability in trying to do so would be quite high. So it's just not feasible to preserve that light. It's too exposed, it's too hard to get to.
From a historian's perspective, why is preserving something like Swallowtail so important? Why do you see so many people from the community coming together to make sure it's done?
Well, I think all communities have landmarks that are important to them, and you know, the island has historically developed very isolated from the rest of New Brunswick, so that it's almost like its own little country in some ways. The islanders are kind of a law unto themselves, or have been in the past, so they feel very, very strong about their identity. And I think having their history represented in these few buildings that are actually preserved, because many of them have not been preserved, a lot of the historic houses are gone, it's really important for them to have that visible, tangible reminder of their past.
Although Swallowtail is much more accessible than Gannet Rock, Ken says if it wasn't for his late wife, Laurie Morrison, a renowned whale researcher who spearheaded restoration efforts for Swallowtail, the iconic lighthouse could have been lost.
It's typically, I think, myself as an islander, it can be taken for granted very easily. To me, Swallowtail has always been here. This tower has always been here. A lot of people don't realize how close it came to being just a tower with a light on the top and probably a small solar panel, and that would have been Swallowtail. That would have been the lighthouse. And I think once it was gone, people would miss it tremendously. 2008, there was a rumor went around the island of this peninsula being sold, which bothered a lot of people. We investigated it, and come to find out it was true. The management at the time felt it wise to sell the peninsula because it was a deficit to society for some reason. So we basically, went social media, talked to a lot of our friends, and everyone got very upset. The more we talked about it, the more upset we got. We found out that, in fact, 2 people were bidding on the property. We went to the village mayor, went to the councillors and discussed it with them. Had a meeting, and they decided that maybe they'd better take it off the table. We promised if they would take it off the table that we would clean up the property. The property was in terrible disarray. So that's how it really started. And it worked out that in 2008, on Earth Day, we had probably 80 people out here, volunteers, and we cleaned inside, outside the buildings. We had 15 half-ton truckloads of junk we took to the dump. And that really started this whole project.
Okay, so the boathouse, right there. In 2008, before there were, the Keeper Society took over the island, that building was ready to slip right into the ocean.
Bart Myers is one of the dozens of volunteers from Swallowtail Keeper Society who has spent countless hours over the past 15 years helping to preserve and save Swallowtail.
The Keeper Society was formed in 2008 when they finally determined that something was needed to preserve this entire peninsula, including the lighthouse and the boathouse and Keeper's House. And so the Swallowtail Keeper Society was established at that time with really a mission to preserve what's here and to maintain this so that the public could come and really sort of live part of the history of New Brunswick. That's why we've got, 15 to 20,000 tourists that come here every single summer, probably an additional 4,000 to 6,000 outside of those dates, mid-fall, early spring, to come and see what this location means to the rest of the province. And so you'll have volunteers here throughout the summer painting, mowing the grass, scraping the lighthouse, painting the lighthouse. And on some projects which take us off of the peninsula to 2 of the other lighthouses, which we volunteer for here, we've actually painted entire lighthouses here. So that mission of maintain, preserve is what's at the heart of what the volunteers do. Now we face a situation where the cornerstone of the peninsula, Swallowtail, is in dramatic need of help. Although what started operating in 1865 has probably been painted multiple times since then, it's now at a point where it can't do that anymore. It can't withstand any more of the erosion we're getting from the wind. The current shingles no longer hold paint. So we're in a situation now where we need to completely restore the exterior of the Keeper's House and the lighthouse. So that our mission right now is really fundraising to come up with a total of, our goal is $300,000, which would pay for all the materials, all the strip down, all the replacements or repairs which have to occur, and then finally reapplying a new exterior to both of these buildings.
With the lighthouse being built in 1860 or so, it's just something that needs to be, preserved. When we get this project done, our grandkids, our great-grandkids won't have to worry about it.
Roger Fitzsimmons says Swallowtail is more than just a relic of the past. It's a cultural experience that transcends generations.
It's been a spot that I always come to, bring the kids out, out to, and we've always enjoyed coming out, especially at nighttime. It's been, you come out at night with the light going, and you can sit over by the cliffs and listen to the seals and everything. And anyway, it's really been a spot where we really enjoy.
Swallowtail brings come from a ways back to the island.
So that's a large format view camera. It's a Kodak, probably 100 years old, and I'm using that to make tintypes out here on Grand Manan.
Photographer John DiMartino from New York spends weeks at a time working at the lighthouse.
It's very, very inspiring. Great light all the time, different times of day, fog, shadows, the light, the elements, the tides. It's been really unusual, inspiring to say the least, yeah. This is my second time on Grand Manan, yeah, because there's so much more to shoot. The people that live out here, I started shooting tintypes of different working people, different friends I've met and become friends with, and different waterfront scenes. There's a lot going on here. They're going to use the images as part of a fundraising campaign, and that was like even more special for me to be able to help out with that as well.
Grand Manan Mayor Bonnie Morse is hopeful restoration and fundraising efforts will preserve Swallowtail for future generations.
I think when you look back 20-ish years ago, certainly before it was divested from the federal government, I remember as a kid going out to Swallowtail, but you literally would walk out, you'd look up at the lighthouse, and that was pretty much it. But now to look out there, and it has been refurbished and, restored, to see the wooden boardwalk, the bell, the whole museum thing inside the lighthouse, it's just really incredible, the work that's been done by the Swallowtail Keeper Society. And I think for the island, it gives us that much more pride in having the lighthouse and having it here on the island.
In Charlotte County, we often see communities rise to the occasion and be such a part of the process of something that needs to be done. On that regard, what are you witnessing here on the island in terms of people stepping up to the plate?
I think that there's already been a lot of donations come in. I see a lot of challenges on Facebook popping up, people telling their stories of Swallowtail and why it's important to them and encouraging others to participate and sharing the link. And hopefully, as winter goes along, we'll see more and more people do that, and we'll be able to reach the financial goal to be able to restore Swallowtail.
And Grand Manan obviously has such a huge tourism industry impact on southwest New Brunswick. How important is this lighthouse to the draw of the island as a destination?
I think it's huge. I mean, it's certainly one of the most photographed lighthouses in New Brunswick, if not in the Maritimes as a whole. And so to be able to say that it's here on Grand Manan, I mean, the fact that it was featured on a stamp a few years ago was also huge. It always makes me smile when I get a letter in the mail with see Swallowtail coming home. I think that it's a huge draw, and the fact that you can go out and actually go in a lighthouse and see how it works, I think that's a huge thing for people, because there is something about lighthouses that people just find magical.
Our first grant, actually, that we got almost immediately, and it was from Ottawa. I remember it was $30,000, and it was actually for the trail. So we got 2 tandem loads of gravel up at the very top of the hill. We brought it all down with tote tubs and wheelbarrows, and we did the whole. And just after we finished, we actually acquired a 4-wheeler after we finished. But we used that, and I built the lobster trap benches that you see and the picnic tables, and we did that all for $30,000. So that was the first one that we did. And we had a lot of volunteers, a lot of people coming to help. Unfortunately, the project lasted so long that a lot of our helpers were getting up in years, and they had knee problems and hip problems. And I think you can tell by coming out here, it's not for the faint of heart if you're not physically active. You've really got to plan, and to grab 2 sheets of plywood and come down the stairs and across the bridge, and it was a great deal of work. It really was.
What's some of the work that you're hoping to fundraise for and get done now? What's in most need for?
One of the problems, and I've known this for a while, I've actually been researching it a bit, I guess, and to try to find out the age of the shingles that are on the lighthouse. I've noticed the deterioration is very good. They will not hold paint. There's a lot of rot in the shingles now. But I think above and beyond that is the nails are starting to rot off. We get like last year we had a big blow from the southeast, and we lost around 30 shingles. You know, just right in the middle of the tower, just gone. Okay, that creates a whole water ingress, not good. In the wintertime, it's very difficult to patch it. So now that the nails are bad, the fastenings, I mean, it has to be replaced. So in the next couple of years, you know, for the sake of the tower, inside the tower we still have old lath and plaster, and it's in beautiful condition. I really want to keep it that way, you know, because water would certainly destroy that. So it would be terrible to lose that. So that's why the urgency to try to fundraise, to get enough money to get the tower sealed up again.
Where we're sitting, part of it's dedicated to your wife, Lori. What role did she play with you in saving this lighthouse? I know she was a girl from out west that
Yes.
that fell in love with the island, fell in love
Yes.
with you.
She was #1 in this. She was the first one to hear about it. My wife did all the work for all the plaques, all the signage which you will see inside the lighthouse. She did all the grant writing. She did all the social media. And she was also very hands-on. She could run a skill saw. She could run as well, if not better than myself. And so we did a lot of these projects shoulder to shoulder, you know. And husband and wife grabs a hammer and the marriage survives it pretty good. And it's like the boathouse, and some of them were very small. They look so big, the problem, but it was such, the end of this boathouse here, which was built in 1873, and the whole end was gone. And we looked at it and scratched our heads, and I'll never forget, my wife went, well, the nails are gone. Let's just put the boards back. And that's what we did. We just board right to the peak. You know, it's just little things like that. She had a real insight, and a lot of the projects, the boardwalk, that was her idea, to build this beautiful boardwalk. This memorial deck was her idea, and it was to honor Elodie Foster, the Lightkeeper's wife, who was killed in 1932, lighting the lamp. And where this memorial deck is where the original keeper's house was. It used to be here. And so it was her idea to do this, and most of this was her idea. And she just gave me the orders, and away I went.
Was the gift shop partly Lori's inspiration too?
Absolutely, yep. She did all the ordering for the gift shop. She saw to our students. We started hiring seed students and Canada Jobs, and she did all that. She looked after all of it. So when I lost her, and there was such a huge void. Not only of losing a partner, but it was also a huge void and what to do out here, you know, but I had a lot of help from a lot of great friends, and to help fill that void, and we're marching on, and I know that's what she wanted, so yeah.
If you can make a donation to help restore Swallowtail Lighthouse, visit swallowtaillighthouse.com and click on the button that says Donate Now. Be a part of Swallowtail's story.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television, your source for hometown news.